Okay, I'm going to call the fourth budget meeting to order. This is the Enterprise Fund. So if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, you have the floor, Chris.
All right, well, good evening, members of the board, staff. I see at least a handful of people are coming in online to watch via home. This is, I believe, the fourth installment of a budget workshop presentation that we've had in addition to the actual during the agenda for the October monthly meeting at the Board of Supervisors meeting for the general fund overview, as well as just kind of a summary overview of all topics. Of course, kind of where we're at to date in terms of just proposed budget for FY25. So continuing to just make the plug that everything that we've been doing, both in workshops and in agenda items during Board of Supervisors meetings, has been both documented and recorded. So if anybody does have any questions about, just the context and details behind all of this, everything is readily accessible on our township website. Just go to the Agenda Center area of our Board of Supervisors meeting agendas and minutes page, and you'll see at the very top of the list there, annual budget workshops, and you'll have both the clicks and links to that as well, like a normal agenda item. So with that, we're Monday, October 28th. Tonight kind of wraps up all remaining funds. If you want to shut the door here, we have a later than expected cleaning evolution happening for our weekly session here. So we're going to be going over the airport fund, the open space fund, and then the kind of the remnants of the sewer fund as well as the fire fund as well. And then any other topics as it relates to general work session items, any questions that came up along the way that haven't been talked about in the public as it pertains to the general fund and the capital fund as well. So we can kind of talk about Monday, November 4th and Monday, November, or any other workshops required after that. Mostly these are held if there's kind of sticking points and issues that we haven't resolved, or there's been a significant amount of public input and feedback over the course of the entire budget workshop session. And to date, none of that has been brought forward, even though the advertisements and everything's been going out. So for the most part, by the end of tonight, I would want to understand for what would be the recommended action for Monday's meeting. Otherwise, we would essentially move towards the agenda as scheduled on the 18th, where we would bring up the final kind of summary review, as well as the agenda to advertise the budget. So without further ado, I have tonight Enterprise Fund for the airport and Enterprise Fund for open space. To be brief, we'll start with John for the airport and Mike for parks and open space, in this case, open space. So whenever you're ready.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm here tonight to present the airport fund fiscal year 25 proposed budget. Okay. In front of you, you can see the airport fund revenues compared to the expenditures, the 24 forecast and 25 proposed. Airport fund revenues for 25 proposed $2,531,959, and the expenditures for 25 $2,437,467. Again, just taking another look at the 25 through 29 proposed total revenues compared to the expenditures. You can see we are showing a surplus for 25 through 29. We're talking with Chris, looking to absorb those surplus funds for capital projects routine maintenance as well as ongoing projects as in the capital plan, AWASC, Happy and Reels, driveway, and taxiway project. And this is an explanation of the capital plan 25 through 29 proposed projects. This is a recap of a discussion that we've already had on the capital plan. Our main projects currently for the end of this year, probably going into the beginning part of next year, is our East Taxiway project, which is a rehab and a realignment of our existing East Taxiway where it feeds into the existing runway, as well as a much-needed driveway repair, as well as an access gate on the east side of the airport to limit any unwanted traffic. We had 18-wheeler go down towards the hangars and had to make a U-turn and fell into one of the new electrical bunkers. So blocking that access off for general public and keep the traffic flow through the airport down the driveway instead of going out to the taxiway is a big safety improvement. Again, all these capital projects are grant-funded projects, both federal and state funded, with the local share coming out of the airport's operational budget. Looking at the projects, this is our access road repair and gate. This actually has gone up a little. The state is going to be granting us $250,000 for the project. And though that's not going to be enough to do a total rehab of the driveway, it's going to be able to allow us to cut the worst parts of the driveway out. If you've been down the airport driveway recently, you know it's a fairly rough road to travel on. But it'll allow us to cut the worst part of the driveway out and overlay asphalt as well as an access gate on the east side. Looking at our reconstruct east parallel taxiway, this is the design with the construction. The part that we're talking about here is next to this blue arrow in red, where the east taxiway connects to the main apron and goes down towards the 2-4 side. There is a fairly steep incline, which actually we have an existing waiver to allow for that type of incline. The plan is to reconstruct it so it will come 90 degrees out from the approach end of the runway and be elevated 6 feet. So we're going to raise the elevation of the east end taxiway, which will spread the new pavement back into this area here, which is our run-up pad, to allow for that. And that will give us a standard threshold. So when an aircraft is parked here waiting for landing traffic, they'll be able to see a full area down the approach as well as the runway, and to ultimately bring it to standards. The total construction cost is essentially 1.67 with our local share, $84,000. Hangar door replacements. Over the years, this may look very familiar to you and from previous years. We try to replace at least 2 or 3 of these roll-up paraport curtain doors every year. A lot of the doors are the original doors from the 70s, so they don't certainly owe us anything, but they're starting to get ripped and torn with a couple of these windstorms that we had through the airport. They have torn a couple of the doors. So we're trying to be proactive and get those replaced. We've made a pretty big dent in the majority of the curtains. There's still a few left. So over the next few years, we'll have all those changed out. This is a very important project for the airport, the installation of our Pappy and Reels. Total project cost is $333,000. All the conduit is currently in the ground. We put that in during our runway project. But this will give us approach lights into the airport. And what approach lights are over here off to the right They're guidance lights that as you're coming in on final, on a 3-degree glide slope, you'll see 2 red lights and 2 white lights off to the side. If you were above glide slope, you'll see corresponding white lights. So if you saw 4 white lights, you were high. You know, red over white, you're all right. Red over red, you're a little low. Or as I say, you're dead. The reels are runway and identifier lights. They are strobe lights that actually are out off to the edge of the runway. And as you're coming in on final in inclement weather on an instrument approach, you'll see the runway and identifier lights through the clouds much before you'll see the actual runway lights. So as soon as you start to see that runway environment, able to see the strobes, you can continue down final. AWOS project we have planned. This is fiscal year 2026. Again, grant funded project, $366,000 as a total project cost, $18,000 of the local share. This is automated weather observation service. So this will give us, as a pilot, current weather conditions at New Garden, clouds, visibility, winds, barometric pressure. Again, geared toward instrument pilots flying in inclement weather where you'll be able to, you know, our minimums, our approaches takes you down to 400 feet above the ground. So you can fly in the clouds down to 400 feet. If you don't break out at 400 feet, then you have to do a go around. But this will allow you to tune in the local weather and get a good altimeter setting. Because right now you got to use Wilmington's altimeter, which is off a little bit from where we are. So in 2028, pavement recondition. Again, the cracks on the runway, any cracks that are forming on the taxiway, this is just a preventative maintenance project, a crack seal, and an updating of the lines on the taxiway and the runway. $166,666. Local shares, $8,334. Most of our local share is about 5%. So 95% or 90% is funded by the FAA, 5% by the state, 5% locally. Reconstruct the terminal apron. This area in orange, this is where most of our tied down aircraft are staged. We have probably about anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen aircraft there monthly as a tenant. The area, the pavement is in pretty bad shape. This is the design of the apron for $175,000. Local share, again, $8,750. And you can see the condition here in this photo. This is a fairly recent photo. A lot of cracks. We're routinely spraying the cracks on the pavement for weeds to keep the weeds at bay. And then when we get into the second phase of this construction, it's $944,000 in round numbers with a local share of $47,000. Again, a federal, state, and local share grant funded project. Any questions?
I don't have any. I think you've been doing a great job. I really appreciate all the hard work you're putting into this asset.
Appreciate it.
On the repaving of the tie downs and the lower part where it meets the runway, will there be any widening included in that? Or are we just resurfacing, rebuilding what's there?
Those projects are resurfacing, more of a reconstruction really than just a resurfacing on the apron and the taxiway. But the taxiway, the width of the taxiway will be our standard width for the design standards for the airport. So it's about 25 feet.
Okay. And then that lower part is going to, that's the part that was going to be raised.
Correct.
For site.
Right here.
Yes.
There's a fairly big incline right here to get up to the runway. So that's going to be raised 6 feet to meet the elevation of the runway, which means that all the excavation is going to get pushed back here and up here as well. part of this project, the fuel hose reels and the meter heads are going to have to be relocated to give us that standard width from the edge of the taxiway.
And then when we get to the weather station, what's the elevation of where that thing reads? Is that runway level? Or is it
Ideally, it would be
higher?
runway level, but that's one thing we're working with the engineer on right now is the proximity of the AWAS.
Right.
Just because of the elevations at the airport are all over the place. Finding that in a position more or less at the same elevation as the runway, far enough away from the runway is going to be fairly challenging.
Mhm. So, and then my last question is about revenue. And next year, President Biden will no longer be our president. Does that box go away? Is it still 5 miles or would it be?
So the TFR for the president, he still will have a TFR, but it will
Correct.
be shrunken in size drastically. So I think it's
3 to 5.
5 miles, 3 to 5 miles, and only up to 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet. So we will not have any impact at all because of that, which will be welcome.
Right, right. Unless he's in the area here visiting his sister or something.
Correct. That
Very well.
could be the case.
Yeah, but it will be
It'll resemble the TFR that we had when he was vice president,
correct.
which had minimal impact at the airport.
That's all I have.
Airport.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
related to that, John, I'm surprised looking at the 2025 budget in future years that revenue didn't increase more. I would have thought you lost out on a fair amount of revenue because of the TFRs.
It's a really hard number to, for instance, we can go after TFR reimbursement because, the fact that the president comes home, if we can justify his impact on the airport, we can go after reimbursement from the feds. How you justify that is fairly difficult. For the flight school, no problem. I mean, that's an easy thing we can take the average of what we're used to seeing on the weekends or even during the day and then average that out over a week. But as far as the airport operations, a lot of our operations on the weekend change to weekday flying. So, I'm optimistic and I think it certainly will increase and I'm looking forward to seeing what the numbers ultimately are. But it's a hard number to really fall upon at this point.
When we did our budget forecasting, we talked about this as well as just kind of just services funding the fees in order to offset expenditures. And it's one where we're just going through an exercise when you're funding a standalone enterprise fund that doesn't seek subsidy from other kind of revenues. You want to be more conservative in your outlook. So you do have to base it off of prior year's history, but then it's one where do you set the bar all the way up at that upper stop or you to kind of set it at a tier lower? And that's one where once you set that expenditure, and for the most part for the airport, a significant amount of that's personnel and our maintenance department stuff. So you don't want to have a hard increase in expenditures with, you might have like a really strong year. Do you get that next year? It's not like, sourceable revenue coming from taxes and property, accessible properties and stuff, which was more stable. So that's really why we didn't go really aggressive with kind of like an ever increasing number going on up. No.
No other questions?
No, great. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone, board, staff, members of the public. My name is Mike Buck, Parks and Open Space Superintendent. I'll be presenting for the Open Space Fund. Control, so with that. So as Chris mentioned, a lot of this information we've reviewed multiple times already. So I'm not going to go into detail into each slide here. If you have any questions about any of this, we're welcome to review this information. But specifically, I wanted to review our intention or revised use of open space maintenance funds moving forward. As everyone probably knows, there are pardon me. There are two ways to leverage the maintenance dollars within the open space fund. One is 25% of the in-year fund balance. The other is 25% of the total balance. We use the 25% of the in-year balance for FY 23 and 24. And, you know, looking into the future as kind of the appetite for open space acquisition has gone down, maintenance needs have gone up, as well as, you know, the park implementation on the horizon. We thought it made more sense, be better use of the maintenance fund if we transitioned over to 25% of the total fund balance. So, you know, that does a couple things, one of which it allows a reallocation of this $247,000 to go from the general fund over to the open space fund. It also takes us from a maintenance and kind of development budget of $125,000 per year up to over $500,000. And as we get here, there's another slide. I'm just going to go ahead and do this one real quick. So, you know, that has two impacts. One is it increases our capacity, again, to take care of those maintenance issues, to put more money into development, to implement the parks. And this becomes a sustained kind of source of revenue over the next 5 years if we stay within a certain budget when we're looking at future open space acquisitions. So it is going to narrow the budget for the in-year open space revenue, which again primarily comes from the earned interest tax. So from 2025 to 2029, we're looking at a land acquisition capacity on average of around $223,000 per year. If we can stay within that budget or under the budget, we can sustain this $500,000 plus amount, again, to support open space maintenance and parks development. So going back here, so we can see the proposed budget for 2025 is just over $1.4 million, with expenditures coming in at 1.125 million there. Now, this also includes the budget, not only includes the local EIT, but it also includes some projected grant monies that would support those park implementation projects, specifically at the Spendley Preserve. And again, here, this is just kind of a breakdown of the open space expenditures against the proposed budget. So we've got consultant fees there, 54,000. You know, this is then broken down into the personnel costs, equipment costs, operations. And out of those three, I think we've estimated that's a 66%, I think, total amount. And then we're allocating that against the open space funds. When we're looking at trying to stay within this $223,000 per year for open space acquisitions, it's kind of a reasonable ask. Out of these, oops, that's the button I was looking for. So out of these 8 properties that the Open Space Review Board has identified, you'll see that 5 out of those 8 properties actually fall, you know, within that budget amount. So they certainly have the opportunity to move forward with their mission and engage with these property owners that either want to conserve their property or get a trail easement, while also growing the fund over time and allowing the parks to have the maintenance funds that they need to be properly maintained and developed. All right. Any questions about that? No.
In the beginning, in the first slide, you have, right, yeah, 15% of the township is preserved to open space. Is that fairly accurate?
These are numbers provided by Chester County Planning Commission for the most part, and it's a mix. So some of them are actual township open space properties. Other ones are agricultural easements with individual private property owners going through the county kind of
Mhm.
process to abate their property by placing an easement on it. So it's in the net. So that's not to say that the township has done all 1,500. I think ours is about 800 acres, kind of around that in terms of what we have preserved, primarily for the most part. Smedley Preserve up by the golf course and down
Yeah.
by the St. Anthony's New
St.
Garden
Anthony's.
Hills, which makes up a significant percentage of that.
Yeah.
But that's one where that 1,500 is still an accurate depiction because that leads to the kind of net impact of total assessable values coming from those properties in terms of what we get back to the township. So that's still a reflection of the use of the space that we have for township open space properties, agricultural easements, you name it, across the board, out of 10,000 total acres in the township.
Mhm. Yeah, so this budget, I guess the point I was getting at, this budget should reflect 8 to 9% of the real estate improvements for our open space based on the figures.
Just make sure I'm understanding.
So if it's 15% and 8% are other easements, we're not taking care of things on other easements that we do not have control of.
Correct, yeah, but we usually assess ours based off, of, you're talking about the use of in-year revenues?
Correct.
Yeah, ours is more of the amount of actual time spent on total acreage of park spaces that we actively maintain.
Right.
So we have 400 net acres of total properties in the township that we have active management of in one way or another. That'd be a trail segment. I mean, we're not currently open to the public for St. Anthony's and Hills, but still has a time and energy demand that still is there, as well as up at the golf course. And that's more of it takes about 2/3 of our staff time, which is essentially 2 individuals to basically do kind of a superintendent's body of work on a day in and day out basis. So that's where the cost allocation split between the percentage of their time, 2/3 of it being towards open space properties versus just like here at the park. And then with that, the bulk amount of added up 2/3 equates to, Mike, if you want to move forward, one more here. I think it's on this slide, or actually one more. Probably just go to the line item budget here. Just to kind of, if you look at the 177, 38, 31, those totals there on the right-hand side, it doesn't include actually go one more slide over, 2 more to the net fund balance. There you go. So the 25 proposed budget you see on the bottom left hand, the 337, that's the total use of in-year funds that we're using from the percent, 25% of the total available fund balance. So 25% of 2 million is 520,000. We are using 337,000 of that one. Bulk majority of it being for operations. That's personnel, that's equipment, that's capital needs, that's everything. There is a local share amount built into that, which is about 90K, but it's based off of grant efficacy and what we do for in-year use of funds towards, in this case, from a budget perspective, 25 and 26, we're going to be making strides to implement the Smedley Master Plan. And so all of that leaves a net fund balance remaining, if you want to use that 25%, of about 183. Now, we do have in-year interest income and other things that we're not just kind of confined to the in-year use of revenues. We can have other things do that. And so that in-year, we'll call it interest income coming in, those other kinds of little sources of funding increase your overall in-year funds. So that's why you have 206,000 available for the Open Space Review Board. If you wanted to look at a property, of course, this is the list they've been talking about for the moments of opportunity to say, hey, we've had a good conversations. We can try to get the property. I don't know these loans off the top of my head. They're in the following slides here, but the parcel tax 68, where we're looking at 109,000. You could use that and still have 100,000 left over without impacting the fund balance. So it's a little more complex and nuanced, but it's one where you're still able to kind of deliver on both fronts. An open space acquisitions initiative and a taking care of open space acquisition initiative standpoint. So this is, and then in that, if let's say a moment of opportunity does come up and it doesn't go forward, there's some just feasibility issues. We've talked about those in prior meetings, and it's one where it doesn't happen that year. The fund balance would grow by that amount because you didn't use it. If you break even, you could still have some growth based off of just earned income tax increases over time. If we do earned income tax increases over time, we don't necessarily do projects every single year, and we develop the township, EIT will go up by more than just the incremental amounts there because it's a reflection of total earned income tax growth in the township. So we're able to move forward in this more restrictive manner, but it still provides opportunity to grow the overall funding capacity for both. And that's kind of what the goal here was, is a compromise solution to say we can kind of have our cake and eat it too a little bit. So I don't know if that was too.
Yeah, no, no, that is very helpful. I just,
We
I
can,
just, I just wanted a quick follow-up. Do we have something in place for if we have to swallow a very large pill at once? For example, one of those
the
properties
$4
was,
million.
yeah, it was 3 mil or 4 million. Obviously, we would try our best to like break it
Yeah.
up, but
it would have to be through like a financed approach to it. You wouldn't be able, and that's one where very, very large properties of that and other iterations of it in Chester County have been met with the need to kind of like model it with like a, you know, I'll call it joint participation. The county gets involved, that can kind of knock back the kind of just what you have in terms of that cost to the township, and then you can do some financing on it as well, just because it would be seen as a much kind of, it would be a long-term initiative, but
Right.
that's the way that we would have to do it. But just kind of the old method of you just thinking of like cash in, cash out, one for one equivalent transaction, like that's one where we would have to basically unencumber everything, stop everything, move
Right.
all of it back to the general fund, and we would still have to grow this by about 4 or 5 more years before we can just do a one-time cash transaction. And if you do that and you don't get a full reimbursement from the county or some other kind of grant source,
Mhm.
you're gonna have to take a long time to grow your fund balance back up to use it in the same manner again. So you would essentially nullify the flexibility of the open space fund for a decade or so just by going through that one kind of obligation. So when that time comes, I would imagine there would be a kind of whole pot of different alternatives we can do to fund it rather than just cash in, cash out.
Right.
Yeah. Financing most notably would be the one that I would recommend.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
I'm good.
All right, this open space parks, as mentioned before, we're in the process of going through some project design and engineering for the implementation of the Smedley Preserve. So it's estimated that the total cost for that engineering design portion will be around $370,000. That, depending on what sort of grant support we get, would be approved to go forward in FY 2025. So phase one, public access and safety. The total cost of this is just over $2.8 million. The timeline of FY 25 to 28 include a pedestrian crossing on Church Road, which would be around $359,000. General enhancements would be fencing, bridges, signs, clearing benches, $311,000. Parking access, just over 1.3 million, and then trail resurfacing at right around 880,000. And then phase two, preserve revitalization, come down the road a little further, cost around 1.4 million almost, which would include buffering at 236,000 and then planting at 1.14 million. And then we have New Garden Hills, which right now, we've gone through the process of kind of scaling back the master plan. And in the draft version we have, we have a number of just over 5 million to implement that version. But of course, we've kind of hit pause there for now, but we do want to keep it just on the capital plan radar, because we never know when different things are going to fall into place that will accelerate the, I guess, the effort put towards New Garden Hills. Any questions about those open space park items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
And just as an added item, these are all primarily grant kind of strategy items here in place. We have yet to hear back from the first one that I think is November is when we're hoping to hear back. And is that for the DCD or for what grant? I can't remember what. And that, just to make sure that everyone understands, we applied for like 5 different kind of scaled grants for these projects. And so we won't start hearing through the grapevine until mid-November, all the way through. I think it's about March or April timeframe of next year for the finality of the decisions on all those grant amounts. So really hoping what we can do is kind of get a sense of scale of grant funding very early on in the first quarter to start enacting measurable engineering requirements to kind of kick the project and move it forward. And we will chunk that up until like the grants pertaining to what types of things that allow for public access to get the park kind of moving forward, but it's still part of a 25-26 implementation schedule. So hopefully good news coming soon, hopefully in the beginning of next year, or at least towards the end of this year. So kind of round out tonight and kind of what most people consider to be the kind of lower end enterprise funds that we have. Fire fund, particularly in this case, for most people who aren't familiar with it, think of it as the hydrant fund, if you will. So this is based off of the township's hydrant tax for accessible properties located within 750 feet of a hydrant. And of course, when a new one goes in, the fund balance funds the actual implementation of said hydrant, new connect happens, and then the hydrant impact is assessed against that property and comes as additional revenue, which for the most part pays for the in-year annual cost for the water servicing for that hydrant. So really, it's kind of a very stable in and out in terms of in-year versus in-year revenues versus in-year expenditures. So as those hydrants grow, I think right now it's what we're at 70% of the township properties are assessed a hydrant, but I can't remember what the percentage is. But the goal was this one's for ultimately for it to kind of reach all areas of the township. So you'd have kind of properties providing to it. So you don't have a property on one side that's not providing to hydrant servicing on another side of the property. So I think it was always considered to be a growth fund to get everybody kind of included as we provide water servicing for, in this case, not fire prevention, but fire reaction capabilities. And then really in this instance, we have sewer fund as kind of like a propped up remnant of the decommissioned former sewer fund that we actually did all sewer enterprise functioning out of. And that's if we have anything that pops up in terms of like an errant, we'll call it a reconciliation process, you will, to make sure that the need is required to pay out of the sewer fund, which is still backed by a remnant sewer utility building revenue, which it's somewhere a little over $600,000 in the net. It's restricted, it's earmarked. You can't use it for any other things pertaining to sewer or any other things other than pertaining to sewer. We would pull that cash out as an in-year adjustment for that one and kind of line item it out as a use of that cash balance as revenue and use of that expenditure to offset that and then close out the budget. So that's why we kind of prop it up as like an estimated low-end use of cash that's adjusted based off of just whatever happens for activity in the year. So really no plan changes from the last roughly about 3 years of track history. So any questions about the hydrant fund, fire fund, excuse me, and the sewer fund? So, now with that, I'll open it up for, we already kind of went through the 2 enterprise funds, but also a moment in time to discuss anything that might have come up during discussions about the general fund presentation, as well as prior capital fund. So I'll leave it kind of there to start. And I can pull up any kind of former slides because this is all part of one kind of 155 slide contiguous briefing here. So anything can be addressed at this moment in time if need be.
Okay. Yeah, we had discussed individually within the supervisor group, looking at giving the full contribution of what the library had originally asked for. They'd asked for $724,000 and change, and we committed to $500,000, and that $500,000, the 5th payment of that was sent over this year. And I think, one of the things we were kind of looking at was to make sure that the library was going to be, a good resource and a good proof of concept essentially. And I think that they've proven that over this past year. They're an excellent resource, and especially, I think, we can wait until we see the results of the referendum, but I think the people of the township are going to also vote with their ballots and their wallets to support the maintenance of the library. And I just wanted to see if the other supervisors are interested in revisiting that extra 224, which would also put us with the other townships that they requested. The other townships gave a full funding of their requested amounts. So
the last installment of the prior implemented 100K per year to a total of 5 years at $500,000 ends next year. So that kind of line items out the kind of Kennett Library line item and the capital fund. And so with that, you would be requesting to see if it would be feasible to do the remnant component of the original anticipated amount, which was 724 and change of the original request from the library, to honor that full obligation based off of the honored obligations that have been provided by all townships as a collective share, to basically fund the full committable capital requirements based off of them building a library. So that's really what
Right.
this would be funding. So this isn't use of added in-year revenue for operations. This is just to make them whole from, I don't know when those requests went out. I imagine it had to have been like 2018 or 19 timeframe. To kind of
2020?
complete the township's sense of its obligated share, if I can understand that correctly. Okay.
Yeah, I think they requested that in late 2018 or 2019, right?
I thought it was 2020 when they first sent it out, because, well, that might have started floating the idea, but I recall the actual,
We're in year.
the first ask came in when I was actually on the board in
Yeah.
2020.
Okay.
So in terms of assessed impact, and we don't have to kind of crunch all the numbers tonight, but just to give you this understanding of like where this would, this would be an add item, I would recommend to kind of do it in like a lump amount to just clear it, and the next available time frame we do that maybe as an obligated expense in 26. But with that, you're essentially talking about just kind of where we are in terms of our net cash position,
Right.
funding towards capital. So when we originally started talking about capital funding, there was an estimated understanding that our year-end cash position for capital would have been a little bit lower, but just due to some kind of continued investment strategy management, we're able to grow that balance back to about 2.9 million in terms of an estimated in-year position starting in FY25. That was also, I think we canceled, I guess, one other, I can't remember where some of the surplus cash else came from, the interest income kind of standing balance that we had in 24. But essentially just the way that it shook out is we added almost nearly like $500,000 to $600,000 more, which is great. It's a great outcome. And it's another one where we're getting, I'll call it not even like a maximum use. We're getting like a platinum use of our investment strategy to just start creating cash buckets from where we have in the past 2 years. So with that, if this was at a lower level based off of our cash plan for capital, primarily for paving operations, it was going to lead to a net need to fund capital in terms of general fund revenues going towards capital, really to kind of maintain a sustainable, solvent cash plan moving forward, because we've adopted essentially a pay-go cash strategy for capital. And that required in FY27, if you remember, a $750,000 increase to get there. But this bump up already kind of changed the plan. And so you can see we're able to lean out that cost to the general fund, to the capital fund, starting in 28 at a kind of nominal increase, if you will. And then, of course, the full requirement to maintain that model moving forward. So literally by just infusing that added cash to the front end, we kind of made it stretched a little bit longer. So it doesn't create the risk in 27 of saying if we don't have the net economic development improvements done to increase revenues, that we would have to increase taxes to fund it or defer capital. That was kind of the juxtaposition we were in. So with that, we already put in a deferment plan that would have kind of a light bump up, light bump up. So if we do that 224 here, all that's going to do, and I can probably proof out the numbers, it's going to pull that kind of obligation to increase it at a larger amount to the left. So we're, instead of planning originally to do it in 27, we'd likely have to do it now in 28. So that's how that would shake out, because you would just automatically take 225 off of this balance, if that makes sense. So the lower the starting position, granted it wouldn't be to 26, but just in the net, the lower the number, the more sooner, that's terrible grammar, but the sooner you'll have to make that increase. In this case, we're planning for a strategy of having added revenues coming in from new development to offset that. So I don't know how that factors into your discussion in terms of funding that, but that's just where we're at from a cash position.
How do you feel about that, Ted?
Do other municipalities have a real estate tax that pays the library too?
They're working on that. So what the library is doing is going around, and again, this is separate from the building. So we're talking about the building, and then the maintenance of the library. They're going around to each municipality and asking them to pass a voter referendum that would commit 0.2 mils to the library. So they already did it in Kennett Borough last year. I think Kennett Township already commits to 0.2 mils. And then they're going to do Newland Township as a referendum, I think, for the municipal primary next year. Coming up, and then East Marlboro. But every municipality, I think, does at least 0.1 mils. It's just a matter of bumping it up to 0.2 so it'll be sustainable. And then this is based off of, so what we're talking about is they came and asked us originally for a 3-year contribution, or a contribution over 3 years, which they suggested we in every municipality, they suggested having a temporary 0.3 mil capital tax. So that would last, it would be 3 mils for 3 years. So 0.9 mils essentially of taxes. So our request was for $724,433. Kent Township was for $721,889. Kent Borough was $218,132. East Marlboro $633,444, and then Newland $117,551. Pocopson $311. Pennsbury $360, and West Marlboro $68,000.
I'm assuming those were based off of like patronage type overall percentages per township. In terms of
Yeah.
assessing. Okay.
Assessed value, average household, average tax per person, library, something like that. Yeah, user.
3-tier.
And to kind of get a sense of understanding, so while there's been some kind of revenue transfer coming from in-year use of property revenues going towards the capital fund, for the most part, this balance wasn't built by that model. This balance was built by remaining funds that were just allocated towards capital from the sale of the sewer system and the generation of in-year interest of that as well. So this isn't really from historical proceeds over decades of growth of capital cash reserve position. This is from more of those kind of more recent fallouts that we had from a cash perspective. I say not revenue, but from a cash perspective. And that would also understand that if this is something that was viable for use of that funding towards something like that, then that's would be the alignment with it, if that makes, it's kind of a clunky way of saying it, but sometimes I like to have like use of dedicated revenues be towards things that were obligated for capital that was identified, several decades ago that hasn't been done yet. This isn't like jumping the line to move to the front.
And we also have real estate taxes going to Chester County Library, right?
Yes, that's through the county tax though, so that's assessed separately. They use that to fund their own.
They use this percentage of the county tax for that, correct?
I think it's a dedicated
It's a dedicated amount.
percent. Yeah, because I don't recall the bill, but I know it's on the back of the bill is like a
It is,
specific
yeah.
mill
Are you talking about?
for the
County tax,
for the library. They break it down into
Chester County.
discrete funds. So
Okay, so out of the 4.551 mils, they have kind of an allocation
Yeah.
that's dedicated to go towards the county library system, which,
yeah,
it's
Gets split
you're
up.
probably getting down to a very
probably like
nominal amount.
0.05 or
I'd have to
something.
pull the
Yeah,
numbers through, but
yeah, that's what I mean. I don't recall exactly, but
Yeah, I mean, the library's doing a lot of great things. I do want to support them. I think I'd want to stay at the 100,000 though and spread that out. 100,000 a year and spread it out over 3 years or whatever, how it works out.
right. So 2 and change.
Yeah.
75,000 for the,
on the
Or
phone.
75, Christie,
It's on my phone.
if you want to read the.
Is this Lisa Bell?
Christie says, I'm not in favor of funding the library.
And this can be brought forward as like an add option for the next meeting that we have.
so,
So you really don't have to decide until you
No.
post a motion to advertise.
yeah, and really, we don't have to decide really until next year. But I think the reality is if we're gonna do it,
I would
Oh,
recommend
plug it
modeling
in.
it into a
Yeah.
multi-year cash plan, yes.
if you could plug it in, and I don't know that it's gonna prolong the inevitable down the road, but if you could do the, 124, or
You said
do
75.
375s, be 225.
Okay.
I would also
74.6.
have to engage with the library to kind of get an understanding of, do they have a sense of an obligation timeline? Did they have to be made whole by, I don't know how much further
Right.
to the right they're trying to extend their commitments for capital campaign? Have they closed the gap and other, so there's some extra context that I could reach out to the library just to kind of get some more information with that. But you are correct of saying you don't need to do this until FY '26 planning, but
I would
can
like
tell
to
you
see
right
it
now
before that.
This is where the impact will be had.
Exactly.
Right.
And it'll just be a reduction of your cash position.
Yep.
But no, I can get that information and bring it forward as a kind of like an add option to include or not to include. So when you motion advertise the budget, you would just be an inclusion of the proposal to fund the library at 220. We'll put that in there to do it as like a option one plan versus an option two plan. All
Right.
inclusive of the library fund and whatnot, with only really this being kind of a minor tweak. And really, to be honest, you would see it just kind of here like that in terms of
Right.
expense.
Okay, and when you reach out, and I can also email them just to confirm that the other municipalities
The only
paid their full fair share, whatever they asked for.
the only risk that I can think of off the top of my head, and granted, it's a risk for everything and everybody everywhere, is just future revenue requirements at the top of the list there in terms of just, we're still getting a significant portion until we start putting this at a higher number than that. When I say this, I mean in your transfers to capital going higher than use of interest income from the sewer fund. You're subject to making sure that this is successful. So if those rates aren't performing at the rate they're supposed to be, and I know there's a lot of, kind of, I'll call it evaluations of what the interest outlook will look like in certain outcomes coming next week, if you will. But that can make a lot of things change for us. It wouldn't just be for funding the library. We would have to really address our entire capital plan too. So it's like a risk that really kind of dictates everything, not necessarily just for sapping the energy a little bit for the library, but just something to think about.
Right.
No, there's a lot of moving pieces.
Correct, yeah, and that would just mean we would shuffle the whole deck around
Sure.
for the most part, which won't lead to a fun month of November leading up to the agenda for November 18th.
More slides, yay.
Anything else from a general fund, capital fund perspective?
No, I think I did talk to you briefly about the wood chipper and the truck and I think the way that you explained it, I'm much more comfortable with that. So that was really,
Yep.
going through it this year, that was my only real concern that I see, except for the top line up there with what's gonna happen.
Well,
And
if
I don't
we
know.
all had a crystal ball that I don't know, would be still standing in this room if we could
Right.
understand that. And yes, you're correct. When you're standing up operational sustainability for, I'll call them like enterprise functions of a local government, in this case, parks and park maintenance, if you have a lot of it and you have that in the moment demand, it's very difficult to kind of meet the expectations of the public to create kind of, we'll call them cleanly maintained grounds and properties if you're restricted to just one single point of failure that's being heavily utilized by our public works department. So when you start doing, we haven't done that until recently, and it's mostly because we haven't had the funding mechanism to do it. Once you have the ability to do that, it's coming through a more sustainable manner. My recommendation is to meet that expectation of the public by making sure that personnel are equipped for what they need to be successful.
Yeah, exactly.
And anything, so the only matter, I guess, if there's no more questions, would be, for next Monday, is the option there to want to continue to do it. We do it remotely, because I think we'll be closing this entire room up, for the following days worth of, precinct operations here. So we wouldn't do it here in person. We would hold it wholly remotely if need be. I know that's on the eve of the election. I don't know if anybody has any other outstanding obligations they have, kind of non-township specific, but just through personal endeavors. So I'm leaving it open to the board to decide. And we'll
So,
update as a calendar, we'll call it announcement, that it's been canceled, and the next budget meeting will be planned at the November 18th meeting.
so as you have the budget that's presented to the board, and I don't think anyone has any more questions, at least sitting here, you're looking at a balanced budget. However, there is a not to exceed a $500,000 increase in
Yep.
taxes currently.
So the only real change, and if you even really want to call it that, was while we were preparing the open space fund budget, we looked at absolutely everything, and that included also open space utilities.
Yes.
So that netted out to be about $5,760. And so all that did was decrease expenditures in the general fund to add to the open space fund as well. So this was originally around 8.114. It's now 8.109. So that was it in terms of a differentiation between the discussion a week ago and today. So
Right. Now, this time last year, we were looking at a 1.05.
Something like that.
the original recommendation was for 2.18 mil
2.1.
increase to basically close the structurally created deficit that had been because of latent lagging revenues and spike and increase of, not spike, we'll call it just a wave of growing expenditures, primarily for public safety initiatives, police, fire, in this case, for personnel required for community development and safety. And so with that, last year, we came to the understanding that a compromise solution to offset the impact of a full increase in 1 year was to do it in 2 years. Subject to the ability to say if there was kind of a fallout from, or windfall to say from, we'll call it development revenue coming in, because these projects at that time, I think we only really had kind of 2 viable ones kind of on the cusp there. They didn't move forward as forecast. So the goal was to take that in-year use of interest income, move it back to its prior use of creating capital one-time cash that is more aligned with kind of a cash pay-go strategy for funding capital. And so that kind of created that gap again for, you can see kind of going back down in 25 from 24, about $1 million moving out of the general fund, because that was just put in there from offsetting that total 2.18 needs, so we funded the 1.05. And of course, if you just say, if you're back again in a year, we would need the additional 1.13,
Right.
because we were able to continue to manicure the general fund kind of expenditures, as well as create in-year surplus to offset the next 3 years worth of funding requirements. We raised the floor up a little bit too, in terms of having to close the rest of that gap. Because the goal has always been to get to a future year with sustainable cash on hand that we have, to not pay our general fund expenditures with general fund reserve funding. So this gets us to 2028 until we have to really decide on what we want to do, pending development. And that's kind of moving it forward. And of course, we have 2 developments moving forward right now that we didn't have a sense of movement last year at this time frame. And that's with the Thompson property. It's going to be coming off of Hillendale Road, and of course, Bancroft development of across the street from the elementary school, well, catty corner to the elementary school property. So those revenue proceeds alone would raise revenues by somewhere between kind of $225,000 to $300,000. That's at a conservative floor. So it's like that kind of already funds your floor, and that's also not accounting for just other incremental improvements over time for total accessible properties, earned income tax performance, you name it. So
Yeah, but I don't think either one of those developments is going to be completed in 1 year.
No, we wouldn't see any planned proceeds until probably the end of FY '26.
Right.
And that's if they start like today. So that's why the whole point of this was to build a leaned out plan
Correct.
to not have to have kind of a sudden need and a windfall in 1 year. And really the whole reason the expenditures go up in '28 and '29 is because the funding requirements for capital. It's not for just, ballooning expenditures for the general fund.
So if we cancel the meeting for next week, we would then move to advertise the budget in November's meeting in mid-November, correct?
Correct, yeah. And so really the fallout from anything is just the fact that, because we're no longer doing the required 1.13 to close, we're able to whittle that down to a $500,000 increase. So 0.63 mils are kind of left on the table right now in terms of what we need because we funded it with other matters, pending future development revenue coming in from planned developments. So with that added increase really boils down to who's the biggest impacted audience. So from a net average of 186,000, which comes from the range of people with assessments as low as 100 to assessments as high as 250, 186 is kind of that average, which really you could put it here and still get that same number. We have a lot of accessible properties kind of plus
In
or
that
minus a
range.
few degrees of 186. It's a monthly increase of $7. So that's essentially what we're going to do. And of course, yes, this would be at the November 18th meeting coming up to advertise for a 30-day period before we can adopt the budget in December.
I'm okay with not having the meeting.
Same here.
I don't know if Chrissy's still paying attention or weighing in here.
I think she's fine with canceling it.
I didn't see a text come in, but I'm assuming she's probably going to agree. Okay, so we'll move forward with canceling the Monday's budget workshop as required, which there was no topic. It was just kind of like what we're doing right now. And we'll be back on the 18th with the kind of similar budget summary with some of these type tweaks and updates, but expect kind of like a very similar summary rundown of everything.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
No, and thanks everyone, James, Christina, all the staff.
Yeah.
And thanks to you, Chris. I think this is a understandable process that is transparent.
It's definitely a team effort. Everybody does a great job at kind of reaching back into understanding kind of what their requirements are, the history of prior expenditures, context and nuance about different endeavors required to kind of put this whole holistic summary into place here, to kind of do exactly what you said, translate it into a very basic understanding of the ins and outs that's required to do this. So.
Great.
Back. All right.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
That's it. That's all I have for
Okay.
prepared items for tonight.
Motion to
All
adjourn.
right, do we have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Seconded.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion is